Welcome to the Peachtree Podcast. Peachtree Learning Center is a nonprofit in Middle Tennessee dedicated to training and discipling students in all the fine arts to become excellent and skilled in order to spread the kingdom of God into the world of the arts. On this podcast, we will discuss topics designed to encourage, uplift, educate, and equip people to proclaim the kingdom more deeply in their own families and communities. Today's podcast is a special episode. We wanted to preface with a little bit of an introduction for you. We're going to be interviewing Haleigh DeRocher, who runs a very successful Instagram account and Etsy shop called Sweet Sequels. She's a lovely young woman who's a mom, and you'll hear her talk about growing up as an artistic person and coming to know the Lord after she was grown, and then developing her artistic gifts into a business that really has blessed her family, but also honors the Lord. She's done great work bringing classic literature back into a fresh marketplace for younger people and even people older who still love the classics. She does some reprints and original art for books that are in the public domain, that are old enough to be in the public domain. And I've loved following her personally for several years. She's very open about her beliefs and her convictions and carries her faith with her into the marketplace. And I wanted to talk to her since she's a mom who does this in a way that honors the Lord, stays home with her children, and also uses art as a way to bless her family. I thought it would be a great encouragement for parents to have this story, especially parents with creative children, because it's so encouraging to see what God can do with artistic gifts in His people to spread light and life into this world. He wants us to do that. He gives people artistic gifts for a reason. And I think as parents, it's a little bit scary to see children who are artistic or musical and wonder how in the world they're ever going to make a living and be able to retire at a decent age and all those things that parents worry about for their children. And so we have brought several people now to this podcast who kind of fly in the face of that conventional wisdom and say, actually, I'm a creator, a sub-creator in the world of art or music, and I do this in a way that honors the Lord and brings glory to His kingdom, but also earns a living. And it's very encouraging to see that. It's encouraging to hear that from several different voices. So Haleigh's going to be talking about that today on our podcast. And after you've listened, I'd love for you to go find her shop and go follow her accounts. Again, it's called Sweet Sequels. And so today's podcast, we hope you enjoy our interview with Haleigh DeRocher. Okay. All right. So we're going to get started. Welcome to another episode of Peachtree's podcast. We're very excited about today's guest. She's a special guest and someone I've reached out to from Instagram, honestly, because I love her shop. She has a beautiful shop of book items, and she sells apparel and all kinds of fun, creative items that are themed with classic literature or literature that should be classic. And I've loved following her account for several years. So I'm very excited to welcome to our podcast, Haleigh DeRocher of Sweet Sequels. So welcome to the program, Haleigh.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks so much for being here. She's a sweet young mom, very purposeful young lady who does beautiful artwork and has talked quite extensively on her own account about godliness and art and how godliness should inform art, especially for people who are believers and in the kingdom, and is very serious about claiming territory for the Lord. So I wanted to talk to you about that a little bit today and talk about how you got started. So you were sharing with me that you actually started doing art back when you were a child. So take us through that a little bit.
Yes. So I have been making art for as long as I can remember. I've always had an interest in art. I started painting pretty seriously in high school, and at that time I was doing oil paints, and I was going to a private Christian school, but I had been to a public school before that. So kindergarten through seventh grade, I was in public school, and then I went to a private Christian school. I was not a Christian at that time in high school, and the art that I was making was pretty dark, the fact that I was not a believer was pretty obvious in the art that I was making. But then I went to college, and I majored in English, but I continued my art all throughout college, and after I graduated, I decided to open my business. And while I was in college, I became a Christian and decided to follow God. At which point, that started taking over my art. Um, and when I first started my business, that was in 2013, so that was 10 years ago.
Wow.
I wanted to do something where I could stay home with my children eventually. I didn't have children at that time because I was newly married, but I knew that I didn't want to go into like the workforce and have like a career knowing that once I had children, I was going to stay home with them. So I opened a business just to, make some money.
Yes.
And, I started marketing on Instagram, and, that's kind of how my business really started growing. And I realized probably 5 years into my business, maybe 4 years, that I needed to start really taking a stand on, like, I needed to be honest about who I was. I'm a Christian. I'm going to making Christian art. Like, I'm making the art that I'm making is to glorify God, because on Instagram, it's a very, I would say the majority of people who are on Instagram are not Christians, and there's a lot of darkness. And it got to a point where I was like, I was posting, stuff about books without, but I was very hesitant to share about my faith and my convictions, because I knew that, like, I would get a lot of pushback for it. And I would probably, have a lot of angry followers who would leave.
Right.
But I was, at some point along the way, I started becoming heavily convicted about needing to speak out about who I was and why I was making art. And I did that. And that's what, like, that turning point, like the first time I started talking about that on Instagram, my art really started transforming. And now, I talk very frequently about why I make art, which is to glorify God. And I talk about, my convictions. And that's a huge part of my brand. It didn't necessarily start that way, but that's where I am.
Well, I followed your account probably for 4 or 5 years myself, and I've watched you walk out some of what you're speaking about, and it's been sobering to watch people, just the level, I guess, of the depth, I'll say, of angst and anger over things that you've posted that I didn't even realize were controversial topics for people that I would have expected to follow your art. But I have loved the fact that, and you're always very gracious to welcome people back in, or to welcome people as they leave. But I've loved the fact that your art, people still follow your account for the beauty that you do portray, even if they don't get it or they don't understand it. There are a lot of people out there that I believe follow you who just love what you do and are willing to just put up with whatever because it's beautiful. And I follow accounts that I don't necessarily agree with everything on either, but I love the fact that they're doing beautiful things, whether they know it or not. They're reflecting the life of the creator and the image that they bear. So, you're obviously doing that in a more vocal way, which I think is beautiful and needs to be done. And that's part of why I wanted to talk to you, because I've definitely see the spirit on your art and what you create. And you've got several different accounts now. You've got an account called is it In the Halls of Imagination or Between?
Yeah, Halls of the Imagination.
Halls of the Imagination.
Yes.
And it's a print shop tell us about that a little bit too.
Yeah. So last summer I opened this print shop, and I sell classic art prints. So all these, I decided to redo a gallery wall in my home, and I really wanted to have classic art, but I couldn't find any anywhere. And I realized that all of this classic art is in the public domain, which means that it's like free to access for anyone.
Right.
And I'm an artist, and I have a really nice art printer, and I was like, I'm going to print off my own prints. And then I just like sort of had this epiphany. I was like, maybe other people need access to this too, but they don't necessarily have the printer and the materials they, to do it. So I decided to open this print shop. I have curated, I think I have like around 350 prints now available, and they're all classic art. And it's been so, it's just been so fun, but also I have my appreciation for art has
Mm-hmm.
grown so much in the last year just by like looking like trying to find new prints and
Mm-hmm.
I mean I'm constantly like just enveloped in it, and it's
Mm-hmm.
been amazing. I love it.
Yeah, I love the different prongs on the fork, shall we say, that you've added to be able to bless your family, I'm sure, but also bring beautiful things back into existence and into a known domain where people can find them. So I've loved watching you paint covers of classic literature books, and you have a whole line of reprinted books that have illustrations that you've done. It's all beautiful things, and I think because you're younger, you're going to reach a different audience than people might necessarily who already love those books. You've probably brought younger readers to those books, which is great and beautiful. And I think that's a work of God. I part of one of the reasons I want to talk to you was just to also, I guess, make people aware in our audience that children who are creative need to have that fed, and also that God makes ways for people to make livings in the spaces that he calls them to be. And so we've talked about that in music. We've talked about that with one of our art teachers here, that she's able to make a living doing what she does, and also teaching classes here. And I see you doing that as well. And I just want to encourage people that when God calls his people to be creative, that it's disobedience not to do that. And he's not going to let you starve, and he's not going to let you fall. He promises that in scripture. And so you might be walking in a place where the road gets very slim or a little bit hidden, but look what you're doing with it. Look at all the beautiful things. I've seen that. I've seen several different ways you've found to find works that were already out there but are very worthy of attention. Bringing those back into public spaces and public attention has been great to watch. So I'm very excited to share that with people who might listen to our podcast, and just encourage parents that having creative children is something that's purposeful from God's point of view, and intentional, and look at one other person that he's shown a way forward for. So thank you. Thanks for doing that. Yeah, you've got several. Tell me a little bit about some of the other works you have, because I would love for people to find your shop, but also just to go and find you and be encouraged at what you're doing creatively in the kingdom. So you offer a whole bookish line of merchandise, and then you have this paint shop, and then you also sell original works, because I have one of your originals on my wall too.
Yeah. I have original paintings. I have probably, I don't know how many books I've done. I think I've done like 40 books. I've illustrated maybe 12, but then I've also just done the cover art for. Right. I like to do obscure classics. That's what I call them. There are books that have are no longer popular, but I feel like they need to be read by more people. I like to do books that like inspired the famous authors, and it's great. It's very intentional on your part, I know. So it's exciting to watch. As someone who loves that kind of stuff, I always love finding somebody. So thank you for being so encouraging. Thank you for what you're doing, and thank you for talking to us about that about being purposeful and being an artist. And I'll just say God bless you and your work. We really appreciate it. Thanks for being here. Yeah. Thank you so much for joining us today. To support this podcast, please go follow us on your podcast platform of choice. And if you're interested in knowing more about the work of Peachtree, please go visit our website at peachtreelearningcenter.com for more information.